All right, y'all should just know that when I started recording this video, this podcast, because I'm actually doing a video and a podcast simultaneously right now, as I started recording this, I had just kind of a dumb moment and decided I didn't want to turn my music off while I was recording it. So fortunately, I caught that a little early, fixed it. We're good to go. But today I want to talk about something that I think is a super important burnout myth. If you've been following along on my Instagram, on my blog, for the last several weeks, I have been talking about burnout myths. This is actually myth number 5 I've been talking about. And this one, I really just felt like needed to be addressed both on the podcast and on the blog. This is just a really, really important one to address in both places because I see this one so much. And this myth ultimately comes down to the fact that it is not a burnout relapse. It is a burnout cycle. I think this is an important thing to say. It's not semantics, because I think a lot of people, when burnout comes back, they treat it as if it's this failure on their part. You know, what did I do wrong? How did I mess up? Why did it come back? It shouldn't have come back. And they treat it as if it's some sort of disaster scenario, something that they did wrong. And that is kind of something I want to set the record straight on right now. You know, not only do I not like the word burnout relapse because it has that connotation, but I also just don't like the word relapse because, you know, relapse we technically associate with stuff like, you know, somebody having a drug relapse or some sort of substance abuse problem. And burnout, I want to distinguish from that. Like you might say, Ellen, I'm addicted to overwork though. You might be, whatever. But I want to distinguish the two because not all burnout that recurs is because you're doing anything wrong. One of the first things I noticed when I started working in the realm of burnout and stress management, one of the things I noticed with myself, one of the things that I noticed with a lot of my different clients is that there was this sort of cyclical pattern to their burnout. For me, I experienced burnout on like a every 3 months to every 6 month basis. And it was usually a different type of burnout. There are different burnout types if you haven't followed along. And if you want to find out which one you're experiencing, go to my website, shameless plug, head to coachellen.com/quiz and find out. But there are different types of burnout. So the burnout that comes back might be different, but also the burnout might come back just because you have some susceptibilities in your personality that are more likely to lead you to burnout. And I think that is an important thing to realize. So this was a pattern that I saw in myself, in my clients. All of us were, even though we were doing all of the things that we quote unquote should be doing, we were still seeing this recurring pattern. And this is something I just called the burnout cycle of high achievers. And ultimately what it looks like is you have this period of burnout and the burnout might start really mild. Burnout is a spectrum. So it might start off really, really mild. And over time, that burnout's going to ramp up until the point where it gets essentially unbearable. The only way to deal with it is some sort of what I call breakdown. You go from burnout to this point where it gets so unmanageable that all you can do is break down. All you can do is essentially have to hit a massive reset button in your life. For me, it might look like, you know, needing to take an entire weekend of doing nothing but sleep and be in my pajamas and watch Netflix. For somebody else, it might be they need to take a full-blown stress leave from work. It varies depending upon the person, but usually that's what happens. The burnout starts really mild, it ramps up, and then it gets so bad that we have to have this forced kind of reset button where essentially it's a breakdown. We have kind of like a mental, emotional, physical breakdown moment. And for most people, what they end up doing is they're able to bounce back as a result of that. They have this moment, they have the experience of some sort of a breakdown, and then they're able to bounce back as a result of that. But where it starts to become a problem is when in that burnout part of the cycle, in that first stage of the cycle, if you don't do anything differently, if you don't change any of your behaviors and you don't change any of your habits, that burnout is just going to ramp back up again and you're going to break down again. So a lot of what I do in my work and a lot of what I talk to my clients about and a lot of what's going to be in some of the upcoming products I'm going to be launching very, very soon, keep your eyes peeled for that. I am really trying to help people mitigate the burnout ramp up. I'm not saying you're going to eliminate burnout completely, because again, there's certain personality types that are just very, very susceptible to burnout. Perfectionists, people pleasers. There's a big reason I talk about achievers, because I am an Enneagram type 3, and we have this get shit done mentality. We care a lot about how we're seen. So we might want to seem like we have it all together. We've got all our shit together. We sometimes have difficulty creating priorities because everything seems like a priority to us. Those are just 3 of the types of personalities that might be susceptible to burnout. Even an Enneagram 3, or excuse me, an Enneagram 2, they might be susceptible to burnout because they're always so inclined to help people. I think that's the 2. Yeah, the helper. They're so inclined to help people that they might have problems saying no. People who are introverts might be more susceptible to burnout because they just need to conserve energy. And if they're not great about identifying the things that are energy sucks for them, they might feel burned out all the time. There are these different personalities that have different susceptibilities and are susceptible in different ways to different kinds of burnout. And as a result of that, if they don't change anything about their behaviors, they're just going to have that burnout ramp back up again, and then they're going to break down. And it's a cycle that's going to repeat over and over and over again. And I say this because I want to change the narrative. I want to change the narrative of people thinking, well, I burned out and that shouldn't have happened. I already recovered from my burnout once. Why is it happening again? I want to change that narrative because for some of us, it is going to happen again. It's not abnormal. It's not abnormal, and it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean you failed. I follow a gal on Instagram who recently went through an experience just like this. And I made sure to reach out to her on Instagram because I adore her and she's great. Shout out to you, Michaela. I really want to make a point of saying like, don't beat yourself up for this. Don't beat yourself up for feeling like I should have had this figured out and I don't, because it's all a learning experience. Full transparency, I still experience burnout. I still experience episodes of burnout because it's all a learning curve. I'll be completely transparent. It was very easy for me to balance my business and my day job for the last 3 years. At this point, my business has been an LLC for 3 years. And it was very easy to balance those things. And then last year happened. And I started getting speaking inquiries and people started finding me online. SEO is the best thing I've ever done for my business. But it's become harder and harder and harder for me to manage that. It's been harder and harder and harder for me to really assess the opportunities that I have coming in and say whether or not they are something I should say yes to, or something I should say no to, or something I should say not right now to. It's become harder and harder because I love this work. I'm incredibly passionate about this work. I'm incredibly connected to this work. And as we've talked about, if you didn't see this on my blog, head on over to coachellen.com/blog. But as we talked about there, passion does not prevent burnout. In fact, it might be exactly the opposite. If you're passionate about something, it's easier for you to burn out because your boundaries usually aren't as good. And I found that over the course of the last 9 months, as my business really started to ramp up because I am passionate about this work, it became harder to say no. It became harder to set those boundaries, to not work on the days where I shouldn't be working. It all became harder. So I have had to re-navigate things. I have had to change how I approach my to-do list and my calendar and my work hours in my day job. I've had to reassess so many things. So if your burnout is coming back, you're not failing. It's not a relapse. It's not some big negative thing where you screwed up. It's not like that. It is just a cycle. It is just a cycle. And each time that cycle comes back around, we learn something new. And we only learn if we self-reflect, if we're self-aware, if we slow down enough and pause enough to say, you know what, this didn't work and I need to do something differently. That's where all those self-awareness components come in. And I'm going to keep this one nice and short today, and nice, short and sweet. But what I will do is I will link you to some of those self-awareness things we've talked about: journaling, meditation, doing weekly reviews, and self-reflection. I'll link some resources in the show notes for this podcast for you to check out, because ultimately that's where that stuff comes in. That's where we learn, what is it that led this burnout to reoccur? What is it that led things to get bad again so that I did have a moment of breakdown. It's all just, that's where we put on our scientist hat and we just gather data. We just learn. But it's not a relapse. It's not some tragic failure moment. It's just a cycle. It's completely normal in my experience for these different personality types. So if you identify as somebody who is a people pleaser, who is a perfectionist, who is a high achiever or an overachiever, if you're an Enneagram 3, an Enneagram 2, heck, even Enneagram 7s and 8s might also experience burnout. 7s because they're just highly excitable and it might be difficult for them to rein themselves in. 8s because they might have a tendency to hide their vulnerabilities, and so they might get emotionally burned out. People who are type A, if you're passionate, if you're kind of a workaholic, if you're an introvert, if any of these things apply to you, it is not abnormal that your burnout reoccurs. And I want to dispel that myth and just shut that myth down right now, because burnout isn't one and done. Burnout will never be one and done, especially if you're one of these personality types. So that is the myth that I wanted to debunk today. So with that, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for following along with this Burnout Myth series. If you did, we are wrapping things up today, but stay tuned because there's something very, very exciting coming up soon. And in fact, what I want to do right now is I want to invite you to a webinar that I'm going to be hosting on March 17th. I'm going to invite you to this I'm very excited about this because I don't know about you, but my new year did not start off the way I wanted it to. My new year, the first 2 months of 2022, and even some instances, you know, at the end of February and into early March. I mean, it is early March still, but you know what I mean? It's been rough. It's been a rough start to the new year. And there were all of these things that I had to do to just kind of get myself back on track. I was experiencing physical burnout. And the sign that I knew I was is I kept getting sick. I was having reoccurring and really long lasting illnesses. Don't worry, it wasn't COVID. I got tested. But I kept getting sick and I couldn't get my feet back under me. I found myself after that happened just highly emotionally triggerable because I've had some changes happening in my personal life that have been challenging to navigate. And so it's just been a difficult start to the new year. Not what I thought it was. You know, 2022 is still very exciting, but it wasn't what I thought it was. So what I wanted to do is I spent some time reflecting on what are some of the things that I did to help me get my feet back under me. What are some things that I did to help me start to feel like I was heading in a good direction again? And I put all of those tips together into a webinar for you all. And I want to invite you to that webinar. Again, it's happening on March 17th at 5:30 Pacific time. So 5:30 Pacific, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern time. I would love for you to come. It is the Say Bye to Burnout webinar. And I'm going to be giving you 5 very, very actionable tips based on my experience to really, really help you get back on track if you are also finding that you're flailing a little bit. Let's help each other out. I want to share that knowledge and share that experience with you of some of what I did and some of the things that really helped. So I hope to see you there. Go ahead and click the link below if that is something you want to come to. But otherwise, thank you again so much for being here, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.